So Alton Towers, in my opinion, and maybe even yours, babe, is both the ugliest but also the prettiest park in all of the UK.
It could basically be the Efteling of the United Kingdom.
That's how I feel about it.
Yeah.
This could be the Efteling of the United Kingdom, but instead it feels like a corporate park.
Did you know that Nemesis was actually supposed to be an Aero pipeline coaster?
That I actually don't know.
That was the original. So Secret Weapon 1 and Secret Weapon 2, which are what Alton Towers has used for code names for their coasters. Both 1 and 2 were different Aero pipeline coaster.
So are you telling me when they opened Nemesis, it was like there was just a couple of unrealized secret weapons?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure Nemesis was by then was Secret Weapon 3.
Interesting. Okay.
But yeah, John Wardley, who developed a lot of like the great Tussauds era projects for those parks. He did Nemesis, Oblivion, Air, Vampire at Chessington, Professor Burp's Bubble Works. Like, he was kind of the lead guy. And in 1990, when Aerodynamics built their full-scale pipeline coaster replica, he went out to ride it and didn't like it. It was bad.
That's wild.
And then in 1991, they started. They had gotten wind of Batman the Ride, basically the inverted coaster concept from B&M, and started the project. That's how long it did. Nemesis took 3 years. They started the project at the end of the 1991 season.
I mean, surprisingly, not that long for a coast like Nemesis.
Yeah.
It's like in the troughs.
Yeah.
In the valleys.
When you think about how like it was really built on was very much like compared to what it is now, basically a flat piece of land, and they just like blew a crater into it to build Nemesis.
I mean, that's awesome. Which is, I mean, not the first and only time. Maybe the first time they did something like that, but not the only time they did something like that.
Yeah. It was the first time, but it
Towers.
wouldn't be the last.
It was a great ride.
Mm-hmm. It was worth the trouble.
And a very good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Sean.
This is Alex.
And you're listening to an episode of
Coaster Kings Radio.
Today's episode is going to be all about Alton Towers, which I think is like the most famous park of the United States.
Really? I think the United States.
United Kingdom.
Wow.
Sorry.
It's kind of like, I think it's like a lot of enthusiasts, when they think about the United Kingdom, they think about coasters, they think about Alton Towers, mostly because of Nemesis.
Yeah.
Blackpool has always... pretty much always had more coasters, but Alton Towers has always been the home of modern coasters, very state of the art stuff. Every time they've built a B&M coaster, it was like either the first of its kind or like really at the front, like the forefront of the development of that product line. Like all three of their B&M projects started like before any coasters of that variety had opened. In the case of Nemesis, it was like 3 years before the ride opened, but just like a year before the first one debuted. And then in the case of Oblivion, it was the only dive machine for a couple years. In the case of Air, it still beat the other B&M flying coaster prototype by like a month, I think. Superman at Six Flags Over Georgia. I think those three rides in particular are what made Alton Towers like the epitome of UK coaster experience. And they're still three of the most interesting roller coasters in the country, I think.
And we're going to talk about that a little bit more in today's episode. And so this is the first episode of our new series. And the series is the Great British Road Trip. That's because we just came back a few hours ago from our Great British Road Trip. And we just went around the UK for about 2 weeks. And a couple parks we actually hit several days. Alton Towers, in fact, we spent 2.5 days at. Because Merlin Entertainment decided that opening hours from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. was somehow enough for a park like Alton Towers, but we'll get to that. So we decided, we did a bunch of parks, a bunch of roller coasters, 75 roller coasters to be exact, and some of which we rode like 10 plus times. And so we're going to be talking about that. And we decided that since we have, how many parks we went to? Like 11 parks?
Yeah, we went to, and we decided to start, Alton Towers wasn't actually the first park on our tour, but we did want to make it the first episode of this series because we just feel like that's a great place to start.
Yeah.
A fabulous place to start, whether it's chronologically your first park in the UK, or if it's just the first one you want to talk about when having the conversation about UK roller coasters, because they single-handedly operate half probably of the UK's best roller coasters, or at least a third.
Yeah. So anyway, we went on this tour for about 2 weeks, and one of which, of course, Alton Towers. So we decided, let's go ahead and split this almost 2-week tour into 7 episodes. So throughout the season, we're going to be dropping episodes that are, the Great British Road Trip, part 1 through 7. And we're going to be discussing most, if not all, of the parks we've been to and the big coasters and whatnot. But there's no better park to start with than Alton Towers, which I think for me was the park I was looking forward to the most, but also the park that disappointed me the most. I guess we're going to just put it out there right now, is that Alton Towers. I think for many, this is like Nemesis Air, which I still call Galactica Air.
Smiler,
Oblivion, even 13, Rita. Those are all legendary names in the way that they have marketed these coasters over the years. If anything, we can give them kudos for their marketing power. There really is like a stronghold on Great Britain and even the world for coaster enthusiasts with their branded roller coasters. Everyone knows them, even in the UK, you go to any gas station stop, there'll be someone wearing a Smiler hoodie. Like in the most random spots, who are like
Smiler
wearing Alton Towers merch.
A marketing miracle, because the amount of people, not just at other theme parks around Great Britain, because any amusement park in Great Britain, you're liable to see somebody wearing something related to the Smiler.
Just like in the most random spots.
Anywhere. York, Great Yarmouth, Chessington, it doesn't matter. You're liable to find somebody wearing a Smiler. But you also, at a gas station somewhere, or at a restaurant, someone could be wearing a Smiler backpack or a Smiler sweatshirt. That ride is the marketing thing of dreams. Unfortunately, the park itself does not reflect quite as strong of a pedigree as the coaster collection itself. If there's one thing that Alton Towers really has going for it, it's the coaster collection. And the other thing that they're knocking out of the park is merch. Yeah. Everything else besides coasters and merch, there's room for improvement.
So today we're going to go around Alton Towers and kind of what we would describe as, it's like a flowy way to go around the park that makes sense, but it's not per se how we did things, because we did have 2.5 days there. So we did Drayton Manor on the first day in the morning, which we'll talk about on a separate episode. I believe even the next episode, to tune in for that next week. Mm-hmm. We then went to Alton Towers to spend maybe 3 hours there. I thought we had 4 hours. We had 3 hours. Run. And it was all right for me, because that was our first time going. Alex had not been since the Smiler incident, so he actually didn't even get on Smiler's first visit. We decided, okay, the goal is we need to get on Smiler and Nemesis were the goal, but then we ended up fitting in Oblivion as well.
And Wicker Man. Yeah, for my priorities were the 3 credits that I needed. New Nemesis, Wicker Man, and Smiler, and those were also high priorities for you, obviously.
And then we fit in Oblivion because it was kind of
Oblivion's right there. On. Yeah.
So we went and we did that, and then we did 2 full days there. So because we did so much and we went all over the place, I'm not going to recite to you our adventure through Alton Towers over 3 days, because to be honest, I can barely remember which thing we did when.
It was a little, and then on the second day, because we had already hit 4 of the most important coasters, we started with 13. But then, it wasn't really that busy over there, and we probably could have started with, Smiler or Nemesis if we were so inclined.
But yeah, so occasionally we will drop some factoids about what we did on what day or whatever, or just to give you our experience. But really, we're just going to go and do one tour around the park, and what would be a strategic way of doing that if you are visiting yourself, and just discuss all the stuff that we did.
If you were going to Alton Towers for one day, open to close, hopefully for more than 6 hours. If you're going on a day where the park is actually open
7 hours
for more than 10 to 4, this, I think, is a pretty smart way to go about it. So we would start up, there's only really one place to start, unless you're staying at the hotel, or you can take the secret back entrance in Forbidden Valley. You pretty much have to start at the main entrance of the park, and you take the monorail from the parking lot. The parking lot and the resort area have a large Von Roll monorail that connects you to the entrance of the park. I wish I could say that the monorail experience was akin to a Disney World level monorail experience, in the sense of getting you hyped and pumped for your day. Especially because their monorail cuts right through the park and has some like amazing views of Forbidden Valley attractions, Katanga Junction, like, or at least it would if it didn't have these horrible, ugly sunscreen advertisements over all of the windows that make it literally impossible to see anything.
Like at one point we were in the park and I was like, oh wait, the monorail goes by here? Did we ride the same monorail? And then sure enough, we did ride over Nemesis. I just couldn't see it out of the windows.
Yeah. The way that like Nemesis, for example, is integrated to accommodate the monorail, because the monorail's been there quite some time, would be amazing, and it would like lend itself to incredible photo taking opportunities. But for whatever reason, the monorails are just covered in these horrible, poorly maintained stickers. The insides of the cabins are ugly. I mean, the monorail stations themselves. I almost said themselves because they smell bad. They smell weird. They look weird. It's like the whole experience of getting from your car. I mean, even getting to the resort is oh my God, the driving to Alton Towers, biggest pain in the ass. The biggest incentive to stay on property at Alton Towers is so that you don't have to make like a 45-minute drive back and forth between the park and like the nearest decent hotel, which is what we did. And we ended up doing that drive or something similar to that drive like 3 times for our 3 separate visits into Alton Towers. And it was like, took years off of my life. And I wasn't even driving. Sean was kind enough to do the driving through Alton, the city of Alton, or through the city of, what was it, Oakmore? I think there's something. Yeah, I think
Oakmore.
Oakmore, yeah.
Either way, it was one of those things where you had to take tiny little country roads to get to the resort. And if you're not used to driving on the left side of the road, like we're not used to. The first day I was like, what am I getting myself into? Then, of course, you started recognizing the roads. But this is one of those places where, like, it really is just country roads, England, like in the hills. Like, the cars around you will go 60 somehow.
Like there's narrow.
But then there's narrow bridges where only one car can go over at a time. And I was like, this is pretty wild for the fact that, like, a major theme park is hidden
like
back
millions
here.
Of guests every year.
And the only way to get there is to take some tiny country roads. But
even getting from the entrance to the resort to the car park is difficult. Like, just the little road from the marquee that says Alton Towers to your parking space is
it's not terrible.
Well, not compared to what you had already been through.
But it's still
like crazier than it should be. Anyway,
let's go to the park.
So now we're inside the park, or we've exited the monorail through the ugly monorail station. We are now enveloped by the 2 corkscrews that were saved from the demolition of the corkscrew coaster, their original thrill ride, their original amusement park ride that opened in 1980. The corkscrews are painted this horrible shade of purple, and they're peeling really bad. And that's
I like the idea of the golden supports and like the dark purple of the corkscrews. However, they're peeling really bad to the point where it looks like there's just the flaking.
It's not maintained. Like, they painted it once, and it's coming up. It just looks bad. The entrance to the park looks weirdly cheap. Alton Street, I think, is the name of their open entrance plaza, which they added in the 90s. Like, this was a relatively late addition in the overall history of the park. Like, they'd already had like several major coasters and stuff when they actually decided to start this whole like entrance plaza and like Main Street kind of vibe. And the buildings have this like very traditional British architecture, but then they're painted all of these bright colors. And like, not only is it like a bad color choice, but it also doesn't seem like it's being maintained very well.
It just feels a little bit cheap. It's like, okay, so now we have the super bright colored buildings that have been painted over a la Six Flags or whatever.
And like cheap signage, like flat.
Yeah, all the signage is flat. Nothing is like actually like nicely carpented or whatever. It's all just like printed signs from not even really a sign shop. It's just printed on fiberglass or whatever they printed on. And then gets stuck up on the wall or like on a stick. And it all feels terribly cheap. And meanwhile, you're staring off into the distance and you see the old ruins of the Alton Towers, the old manor, which is a giant, beautiful castle.
Breathtaking.
Which is really ruined, so it's not like nicely maintained or anything. It's just like ruins, really. But it's like a really cool presence. And these yellow, orange, green, purple buildings, none of that matches the aesthetic at all. And then just in your eyesight, you have 3 different colored benches just all over the place. It does not feel like it is a cohesive park or like a cohesive experience. You could have walked into Alton Towers and looked at the towers and there's beautifully old maintained little medieval streets onto the lawn in the gardens, and like it could have been an incredibly beautiful and exciting, exquisite entry to the park. But instead it feels like overly corporate, slapped on, cheap, like super cheap, and it just ruins the feel. Like we said in the very beginning of the episode, this could have been the Efteling of the UK. Like the nature aspect of this park, if they, it could have been a giant forest full of really nicely maintained and complementary rides where everything really feels cohesive. Instead, the moment you walk in, it feels like someone just vomited color and
cheap particle board, and
it just doesn't feel like a nice exclusive experience. It just feels like kind of tired and then painted over.
It's just stuff is just not built and designed and painted in a way that that is worthy of what a beautiful place you're in. And everything in that way, the entire Alton Towers experience is constantly fighting with itself. You have, on one hand, you have just the beautiful hundreds years old history, ornate gardens, and just incredible stonework and topiaries and things. And on the other hand, you have lots of cheap materials, temporary buildings, things that feel like they were done very short-sightedly and with no interest in a long-term investment in materials and infrastructure for this theme park. So that's a feeling that really dominates the whole Alton Towers experience.
I guess
especially from the get-go, right when you walk in.
I guess for me, I do want to say that there's always potential here. It's not one of those parks that just throw it away. It's so flawed.
All of these can be fixed.
Because the park does have really beautiful bones, and it is meticulously maintained is not a good word, but the gardens, for example, are very pretty. The experience overall, if you are having a good experience, is quite nice, except for the fact that I feel like the Merlin corporateness just slaps you in the head every corner. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And it's just kind of one of those things where it's not all bad, but the first impression just isn't great.
Yeah.
But anyway, so
from here, basically, your Alton Towers day, your efficient Alton Towers day. You walk in, you see the grounds, you see Alton Manor in the back, and you hang a left. Immediately to your right is CBeebies Land, and we'll
discuss
talk about that later.
Yeah.
But first you hang a left, and once you have passed the Skyride station, which we will also be talking about more, because the Skyride, which just reopened this year, is an important piece of the puzzle when it comes to having a very efficient Alton Towers day. So you go past Entrance Plaza, past the Skyride, and the first area is Mutiny Bay, which is themed to pirates. It's actually one of the cuter looking areas. Everything in Alton Towers has not everything, almost everything that is themed in Alton Towers. It's either super bright colors of kiddie areas or something foreboding and gray and scary and intense. And so Mutiny Bay is definitely that. It's lots of browns and grays. It's mostly a pirate themed area. They have a very cute sea life aquarium that we wandered into during a thunderstorm, a brief 15-minute pop-up thunderstorm that shut all the rides for half an hour. That's really cute. They have a Max Splash battle that looks really nice. Wicker Man is the major ride in this area.
That's really good. Wicker Man doesn't quite feel like it is a pirate theme.
It doesn't actually fit the theme.
But at the same time, I guess putting a wooden roller coaster with the wood tones would be the best suited for maybe a pirate area.
Yeah, anyway. Tonally it works. It doesn't actually, and I guess it's themed to being in either North Ireland or Scotland, so I guess it's geographically
Oh, is it themed to being there?
Yeah.
Oh. Okay, that's possible. So
didn't you hear the guy's accent in the pre-show?
Everyone sounds British to me, babe. So anyway, Wicker Man, which opened in 2018, is the newest big secret weapon roller coaster of Alton Towers, and I will say it really did feel like one of those legendary Alton Towers rides, despite it not being very big, because it is a mid-sized GCI located on the side of a hill. The presentation for this ride is great. The presentation of the ride really is what we would have expected from Alton Towers back in the Nemesis Air, maybe even 13 kind of days. It really has a cool presence. So it really does feel like one of those kind of attractions, despite the ride not being as big. So the queue, just like Nemesis Reborn, it goes all the way around the ride, and then you eventually make your way to a pre-show where there's a back valet drop, which is great because there's no bins on the platforms, because in order to run this pretty small GCI with 3 trains, you need to have no loose articles. So you get to your train and you sit down. Like there's no crossing over, putting anything on the side. Like you have to ride whatever's with you, right?
This ride is like a kindred to Mystic Timbers at Kings Island. It's a medium-sized coaster, very well themed. Well, I guess relatively well themed for a wooden coaster. And they run 3 trains, and so they are getting those trains out very quickly, very rapidly. The pre-show for this ride is awesome. It doesn't have a post-show.
So I was going to talk about the pre-show for a bit. So the pre-show, once you drop off your bag, so the theme of the thing is that there's a giant wooden statue, and these families that have been living in the woods, almost like kind of secluded from the rest of the world, they have been like honoring these.
They're in a cult.
They're in a cult. They have been honoring this giant statue who's going to one day bring liberation and freedom and whatnot. But in order to start that, the ritual of the sacrifice, they need to sacrifice human bodies to the Wickerman, which is like this giant, the giant wooden statue with 2 faces. One side is kind of like a normal face, and the other side is like with devil bull horns, whatever, ram. Yeah. There you go. And I will say, like, you send this like. Pre-show room is quite tall, and it's covered in wood, and it really does kind of feel eerie. Like it feels very culty, and like the way that people, the whispering of the speakers that have the whispering going on, and then, they tell you that story, and at one point there's like some air guns, and then the screen disappears, and this projection mapping on this smaller version of the statue is there. I thought it was creepy
very
as
well
hell.
Done. Yeah,
I was kind of creeped out.
I was
oh my God.
impressed.
I mean, I had this thing with like cults anyway, and I'm kind of creeped out by, and so that was like, oh my God, this is like my worst psychological nightmare.
Scientology roller coaster.
So, anyway, so that was kind of creep. So, then you get to the station, and this is one of those parks where, like, you can absolutely not pick your row, and I hate that. But luckily, we got a row towards the back both times.
It's not as big of a deal, and you can probably ask, if you ask nicely. I think we asked on Oblivion, because we got, like, 2 back row rides, and then we really wanted a front row ride or something like that. For Smiler, we asked after riding a few times to do the front. But like with Wicker Man, they absolutely do not accommodate row requests. Part of that has to do with like capacity. Also, the station's very small, so like I get it. Allegedly, the ride's not that great in the front half of the train, or you're in like the front 8 or 9 cars. Our friends, everyone says that it's like a backseat ride only. So we got lucky with 2. We got a row 10 ride and a row 12 ride. And our rides were awesome. This ride is awesome. It is a beautifully maintained coaster, great airtime.
Runs well.
Has obviously a nice vibe to it. The prop in the middle with real fire, like, is so cool. It doesn't have like a big post show the way that Mystic Timbers does, but it has a pre-show. So like it felt very Mystic Timbers like in all of its like.
In a way, it
size.
also kind of felt a little bit like Nemesis Inferno in Alton Park, because you roll out of the station and then you roll through a tunnel with fog effects that are supposed to mimic like fire, and then you go onto the lift hill. The lift hill is quite unique because they cannot build above the tree line, so the lift hill is like at 2 different inclines. Almost was kind of like a mountain coaster.
It's a fascinating looking ride. And the first thing, like as soon as you look at it, you're like, oh, this is interesting. Like there was definitely some obstacles they had to work around with.
And then the majority of the ride features low to the ground elements, kind of following the terrain, except for anything that touches the actual Wickerman statue. Or structure, I guess. And there's a couple tunnels. They love their fog effects. Everything at Merlin Park's fog effects. This thing is full of it.
Fog effects everywhere.
Then there's a bunch of fire effects. So you go through the actual Wickerman 3 separate times, and at all times there's like fire that like kind of like explodes on the shoulders of it. And then there's a bunch of little screens built into the structure that like showcase it being on fire at all times. They use fog, actual mist, like spraying water. So it's actually
the water is important because
element.
That keeps the ride from accidentally combusting, like accidentally setting itself on fire.
So
to keep it wet.
It's quite that's all pretty sensory. And even though the ride isn't very long, there's a couple of really like good lateral moments where there's a one turn that's just like a flat.
It has a flat turnaround halfway through the ride. It's wonderful.
It's almost kind of like Ghost Rider at Knott's Berry Farm, where you have that finale, like where it's really flat. It kind of feels like that. Then there's a couple straight drops, and even though it doesn't do much, being in the back row because the elements are so small, it is kind of whippy.
Yeah,
which is nice. And then for me, it was just like a visual feast, like having the giant statue there, and then going through it a couple times, the fire effects and the tunnels and the fog, like pre-show fog tunnels.
It's a whole package, like a total package.
It really did feel like, despite it not being like a big coaster, Alton Towers proves to you that like as long as they dress it up nicely, it can be a really cool coaster.
It was experience. Like a classic Alton Towers, like knocked it out of the park. Like the only complaint that I could even think of for this ride would be like getting if both of our rides where he had been forced to sit toward the front of the train when we really wanted to sit toward the back, like I could see that being like a huge damper. Not only because it just seems unnecessarily abrasive for the park to like assign rows, but also just because you don't get as good of a ride experience apparently if you're not sitting toward the back. But our personal experiences with the ride were wonderful, and it felt like a Nemesis level like win for the park, like a Nemesis level, like wooden Nemesis, like of that level of like storytelling and like success with a ride layout despite the circumstances of building in a park. Most people probably know this, but for those of you who don't, and that's totally fine, you wouldn't know unless somebody has ever talked to you about Alton Towers or you've been there. But Alton Towers cannot build anything over the tree line at all. They have very tall trees. Some of them are like 60 to 70 feet tall. But that means nothing in the park can stand taller than 60 feet.
Right.
60 feet is kind of the magic number. So everything in the park has to be below the tree line. That's for visual purposes for like the local residences and also for noise purposes. So like for sound dampening reasons, they don't want anything over the tree line. So every coaster in the park, every ride in the park has to accommodate this rule. So Alton Towers has really become legendary for their creative problem solving and handling of this.
And so when you exit the ride, you pick up your bag at the valet, which I will say Alton Towers is doing that for almost every ride on the weekend. But then when we were during the weekdays, it was only Wickerman that did it, I think.
Yeah.
But I actually do like that process.
It's a great setup, yeah.
Like Baron and Efteling does it, which is the ride I have the most experience with. But then Thorpe Park has a couple rides, and so does Alton Towers, where they do it. And I kind of love that.
They have a lot of rides that do it, because like Smiler does some of the obvious ones, like Smiler does it, obviously Wicker Man, 13, but even like Nemesis Subterra did it, which I think was like a really smart thing to implement on a ride where like it, because of the nature of the attraction, like having loose articles on the floor or around you or something like just doesn't work.
Yeah.
So like it's a really great system, and like they've employed it on several rides at Thorpe Park as well.
I wish they would do like a valet system in the U.S. parks. I'm kind of a little bit surprised that we haven't seen a single U.S. park do a valet system yet, because it works very well.
Yeah. The closest we've gotten are like the back-to-back, the double-sided lockers on like Velocicoaster.
Yeah, or what we've seen is like, those loose article bins that swing from the entrance of a ride, and while the ride dispatches, it's kind of like a Yugo Striker and stuff, and then they land on the landing platform, so you don't have to cross through it. You just, you just do it.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, so now we're going to talk about the area that lays right next to it, and it almost feels like one giant area.
Yeah.
And what is it called
Katanga
again?
Canyon.
Katanga Canyon.
And this was actually like their first like really themed area. In 1992, they added this Mack mine train, like a Mack Blauer Ensign, and it was like their first real like custom coaster. Everything else in that park up to that point, they had like a variety of like small, either portable rides that they had on loan, or like in the case of Corkscrew, like a production model ride. The mine train and the redevelopment of that existing area into Katanga Canyon was like their first foray into like really intricately themed areas, and it was an important precursor to Forbidden Valley and Nemesis, because this was like they'd already, like for the record, like they were already working on Nemesis when they opened this. 1991, they had their hands full because they'd already started blasting for Nemesis and working on Forbidden Valley. And then they were also doing Katanga Canyon and reskinning and retheming the existing River Rapids ride into that area and building the mine train around it. And so that's like it's also like the only themed area in the park that is not themed to like something really dreary or something that's exclusively for kids. It's a cute area. The integration with the mine train and the Rapids ride is really cool. We didn't ride the Rapids ride. Apparently, it's really boring now, ever since the Drayton Manor Rapids Ride incident. We won't talk about it here. We may talk about it a little bit in the Drayton Manor episode. But basically, they've turned off all of the effects for the Rapids ride, and it's just kind of become like this drift.
Yeah, there's like no possible way to drown.
Nothing.
Let me just put
there's nothing on the Rapids ride of substance, so it's.
And
really
then there's speakers all along the Rapids ride that yell out like, "Can you stay seated, y'all?" Whatever, like they be saying.
Like really.
But it's so overpowering of the whole area. Just like the same little 30-second music loop, and then like
it's kind of
speakers of them yelling to sit down.
But it's like, because it's not a long walk from Mutiny Bay, most of these areas, it's like they feel like there's a huge walk between them because Alton Towers is so big.
Yeah, the areas themselves are generally not that big. It's just that the walk between them all is very big.
You spend a lot of time at that park, like going from point A to point B. But yeah, Mutiny Bay and Catania Canyon are actually like right next to each other, so they do feel like kind of like one area. And we rode the mine train. Obviously, Sean needed his credit. Great ride. Way better. I went here 10 years ago. I don't remember the mine train being that good, and it was awesome.
So when we wanted to ride the mine train, it was actually like a lightning storm that came by, so it closed the ride for a little bit. So that's when I went to Sea Life, which is just like any Sea Life. It's quite cute. It's actually nice that it's included with admission, but it's just like any Sea Life.
Sea Life is a chain of like small aquarium-based attractions. They have like 200 around the world. And a lot of the Merlin parks now have an attached like miniature Sea Life inside their parks as like part of a marketing thing, so that like maybe you'll want to go to a Sea Life aquarium somewhere else in Great Britain or in Europe or in America or something because you went to the little one inside of Alton Towers or whatever. And the one at Mutiny Bay is really cute because it's pirate themed. But yeah, we swung by and did that while we were waiting for the mine train to open.
So the mine train opened, and we were there at the right time. We were kind of just waiting it out, and then we were some of the first people in the queue. In fact, I think we were the first.
Yeah, we just walked right on, sat in the back.
And we sat in the back, which is nice. They're the old school trains, so they're not comfortable to sit next to each other. But Alex and I both got our own row, so did Alistair, who we were with. Shout out to our friend.
Hi, Alistair.
And then we rode a couple times. Well, actually, it just went around twice.
Yeah.
But it was very, very good. Surprisingly good. In the back, it's quite whippy. There's like a big drop into a tunnel that then also is the same tunnel as the Rapid Ride, so you can whiz by the Rapid Ride. And I actually quite enjoy this. This is one of my favorite of the Mack powered coasters, mostly just because it was quite punchy, quite large, had big drops,
and just a great setting.
Yeah, it didn't feel like the usual smaller product line version of it. Mm-hmm. So it was quite good. Not good enough to spend a lot of time talking about though, but it was quite enjoyable.
Yeah. But yeah, so that's basically, so the first like two themed areas that you'll come to at Alton Towers if you hang your hard left and start with Wicker Man and the mine train. But then from here we're gonna reel it back. We're gonna backtrack to the Skyride station that we walked by in between the entrance plaza and Mutiny Bay, and we're gonna take the Skyride over to the Forbidden Valley station and then stay seated through the station. It's like a little elbow shaped sky ride with it's technically one ride, and you can either disembark in the mid station or you can continue and travel over the beautiful gardens of Alton Towers and continue into Dark Forest. And that's actually what we're going to do right now in our little hypothetical efficient day at Alton Towers. The sky ride is just a great experience in and of itself. It's really useful at a place like Alton Towers because areas like Forbidden Valley and Dark Forest are so far removed from other attractions and things of substance, especially because Forbidden Valley and Dark Forest are separated by the gardens, which are not only massive and beautiful, but also it's like 250 stair steps if you walk it, which we did with Alistair, just like because the sky ride was down and we were like,
I actually loved it though. It was very much like a big hike. It'll go all the way down to the valley, and then there's the pagoda,
it's like proper
and the
hiking.
water. And
it's really cool.
It's a very nice hike, and I actually would have liked to have done it again, maybe like a different path, because there was this old like tea house garden. I call them tea houses, but there was like lots to do, and it's actually very pretty, and it's on a very old estate. So, and it's decently well maintained. It's about as good as I could have expected from this company. So all things considered, it's actually kind of worth time if you have time. If you go on one of those days where it's open 10 to 4, don't even bother with it. Just like try
at the very least
be strategic. But
you'll see it from the Skyride, which because the valley goes down so far, you're actually up very high. I think the highest point in Alton Towers from like the attraction that you're on and the ground is halfway through the Skyride when you're hovering over the gardens and like the pagoda and stuff. Anyway, so we've taken the Skyride now from like the entrance of the park through Forbidden Valley and over to the Dark Forest, where there's only 2 rides in the Dark Forest. Both of them are coasters. 13 is the centerpiece of this area. It is the reason why the area is themed to the Dark Forest. It used to be called Ugland. It was a like Flintstones-esque, like cartoon prehistoric style area that opened in 1999, and it had like some flat rides, and Corkscrew was like the focal point of that area. And they added Rita, Queen of Speed, in 2005. They incorporated a like drag racing theme into Ugland. But then when they when they demolished the Corkscrew, put 13 there, and removed all of the other little rides, the little flat rides. They had like a wave swinger and like a Mondial Indigo and like that kind of stuff. And then they took all that out, and then they gave it this like haunted. I mean, it's the kind of it's really very adjacent to like Forbidden Valley and like to a lesser degree the X Sector, where it's just like it's a forest, it's haunted, bad things are happening. Like that's kind of the general vibe of like half of Alton Towers is e-ticket rides. Yeah. So like it's well trodden.
One is
territory.
futuristic, one is themed to being in the forest, one is themed to being in some sort of
like a government
facility valley where some monster lives. Yeah. Like it's all very typical.
Yeah, this is really a theme for Merlin parks, because you will find not identical but definitely adjacent theme experiences at other parks in the UK owned by Merlin, and even some of their international parks like in like at Gardaland or at Haida Park. But yeah, the Dark Forest, there's not a whole lot to it. Rita was closed on our visit, so like without Rita, it's really literally just 13, and the next nearest attraction to 13 that isn't like the Sky Ride is like not at all conveniently situated. So without Rita, it's really just like a super isolated little coaster. And it's not a ride that I think has particularly aged that well, not because it's a bad ride, but because the gimmicks on the ride have now been done a lot and differently and better by newer coasters.
Of course, I remember the times when 13 was marked as like this completely thrilling experience that like you needed to sign off on. It was not kid friendly.
Yeah, they were going to sell rubber pants in the gift shop and
like
stuff.
It was like pure terror, super extreme, like
psychological thrill ride.
And then you get there and like, I mean, where?
Like what
I
don't
get it. And then, the queue, I mean, it's just like a forested ride. And then you get to the station, and the station feels a little haphazard to me because whatever you call it, because it's like these metal platforms that you have to walk on, and you get inside, and then there's this cloth hanging from the ceiling, which I can't even tell if that's steaming or what it is.
It's supposed to be part of the towers that was like discovered, and they're exhuming it. So it's supposed to be like a dig, like an archaeological dig. So they've got like the scaffolding and stuff around it, but like lots of parks have done that. King's Dominion just did that with Rapterra, and people see right through it. They're like, okay, we know what you're saying that this is, but what it actually is just kind of like a cheap way to do something that's like a storytelling theming experience. And with Alton Towers, I don't think it's any different. Like, there's definitely money there in the ride. That's just not where the money went.
So anyway, so you get on the ride, and I will say train-wise is not uncomfortable. It's very much like a family-style intimate train.
Yeah.
And then you dispatch, and this ride cannot run in the rain because of the tire drives, which is kind of shitty because it's the UK. It rains all the time. Luckily in our trip, it barely rained. So we got up the lift hill, and then you go down the first drop, which is actually just a giant brake run. So problem number 4 at this point already is that it's like a giant brake run. And then you go up a couple of really weird, it almost feels like the first ever jet ski coaster from them. Like the track, the supports, it's all very much like the SeaWorld jet ski coasters. And then you eventually make your way up into another little lift hill, and then you turn a corner, and before I get there, the reason that it gets break down so much, because this lift hill in particular, it's supposed to be a block. So before they added the trims to the drop, and there's another set of trims in like this airtime hill that doesn't have any airtime, so like a hill, I guess. It's only meant to slow you down to the point that when you get to that next lift, you can be stopped on the lift as a block measure. Because then when you crest the lift and turn the corner, you are in the show scene that has the one of the original drop tracks.
I believe this was the first. Like, it was technically the first vertical drop track sequence on a coaster.
And I will say this is the best part of the ride. So you get in there, and it's a beautiful show scene, obviously kind of creepy, and some statues are in there, and then the lights turn off, and then air cannons, which this chain loves doing air cannons. I'm scared of air cannons. Air cannons scared
Bless his heart. He's like plugging his ears on the second ride. He's like, I don't want to experience this again.
I just don't like air cannons. Like, it's loud, it's windy. I mean, the wind part's not even like the bad deal. It's just like it's loud and annoying. Anyway, so like I didn't know what to expect, but I had a suspicion because it's not my first rodeo. So anyway, so then you have like a mini fake out drop, and then you have a big drop, and I thought that was actually quite a good, impressive part of the ride. Like okay, I get that this is like the psychological part. By no means is it so terrifyingly thrilling that you need to buy rubber pants afterwards, like whatever, right? But anyway, so then you go backwards. You have like actually pretty punchy launch backwards, and then there's a really awkward turn where like every quarter of a turn you like readjust your banking on the track. It feels really awkward. Like some of the most awkward coaster.
It's like a big underground helix, except you don't go like it doesn't go up or down like a helix does. It's just basically just a big underground circle that repositions you pretty much in the same direction that you were already facing, except now you're on like ground level with the station.
And then you launch forward, which is really strange. Like, oh, the launch, great. But then you launch straight into the final race. Yeah. Like, it's like, and
it's really a launch, like,
it's meant so they can clear that switch track. Sorry.
That's Sean's air cannon impression. This is the experience.
So excited about the launch. It's really good. But it's meant to like launch you past the switch track so the switch track can reset in time for the next train to be able to enter the helix, because this thing was designed to be like a really high capacity ride, which is why they want all this blocking to happen. The ride is really just a glorified family coaster. In fact, this is the most family coaster besides the Mine Train in the whole park, and of course Octonauts, which Octonauts is kind of cute.
Even Wicker Man is more intense than this ride.
100%. And so when we came back to the station first time, I was like, well, this is it? Like,
he's like, wow.
So then, but since it was still before park opened, I will say kudos to them. They opened this ride about 20 minutes before park opened. So we actually went back online and rode it again before the park closed. Before the park actually officially opened. Sorry, It was still closed. And we did get a ride in the front row. And I did enjoy it more in the front row because the visuals and, and there's not really a bad coaster in the front row because you can always kind of enjoy the visuals as a nerd. But the ride itself is still very much like a supporting act. It didn't feel to me like the other big projects. It didn't feel like a secret weapon number, whatever it was. It just felt to me like, oh, we have this space, we got to put something in
this ride when it opened.
Theming was the only saving thing, and I think it didn't
even
do
that's
enough.
Not that good. Yeah. This ride was considered a huge disappointment. Marketing, it was doomed from the start. They had no business marketing this ride with the level of fervor and it's just impossible to live up to the expectations. I mean, you could have built like an Ijanika clone and it still wouldn't have seemed like the goofiness of the marketing would have been justified by the intensity of the ride. And then you build this coaster. It's literally Intamin Family Drop Coaster is literally like the product line that this ride belongs to. And it's like the drop is good, but just so much of it just feels like it's setting up for the drop and then like getting out of the drop. Like it just the whole ride is just framed around the drop sequence, so it doesn't feel like it's a well integrated event. It's kind of in the similar vein of Verbolten at Busch Gardens Williamsburg, which you could argue, I think Verbolten's a better ride. It's way more intense. You could argue that the drop track and like the overall layout of the ride is a bit more successful approach to this concept. It did come a couple years later, I will say, but this ride just suffers from being like a prototype ride that was already kind of gimmicky. It suffered by comparisons to other Alton Towers rides. It suffered in the context of the marketing, and even to this day, I think people like struggle with getting excited about it. But it's an interesting ride regardless, and it's fun if you just take it for what it is. But yeah, and then from this point on, from here, assuming Rita is open, then you ride Rita. If you've ridden Desert Race at Heide Park, you've ridden Rita. It's a 0 to 60 mile per hour double figure eight Intamin hydraulically launched coaster.
Like it looks cool in the forest, but it's not. I don't think either of these coasters should be your priority. Like if you're even like at a slight risk of not getting on all the coasters, like the major coasters, this little corner back there should be the last. This
should be.
Also, I hated the theme in there. Not gonna lie, it's super cheap.
The Dark Forest theme,
yeah, because that's just... like you have this marquee of the Dark Forest, and like okay, but then the moment you walk in, it's like shitty fast food, and it's these like boxing machines. I mean, I complained about this on the Instagram story, but like there's boxing machines everywhere.
It's
like the one where like you have to pay, then this ball comes down and like you hit it as hard as you can, and bam, like whatever your score is, right? Like all really great, like great for the aggressive masculine British man. Like I get it, like really fun for you. But then there's like 3 in this area, and then there's 3 in every other area, for the record.
It's just really...
And it just felt like ugly, there was no theme to this land. It was very flimsy.
Very insubstantial. 2 coasters that do not seem like they contribute equal amounts to the overall theme or like alleged story of this area. It's obvious that from the start, Rita never really fit in with Ugland, and it also still does not fit in with the Dark Forest. Like it's just very, very forced.
Which is funny because it could have just themed it to something else. Like it didn't have to be Rita, the Queen of Speed, with a bunch of loudspeakers and like American racetrack theme.
Yeah,
that was then like loosely banned over to be like a forest racetrack theme.
It didn't need to have the 1950 muscle car trains a la Accelerator.
Like you could have themed it to some sort of like a dark forest monster or like some sort of almost like swarm in a way, like something like really
I think making it a creature feature would have been a great idea,
right?
Actually.
And then like this freaking beast like rules the woods and flies through it at like an alarming speed. It could have been a really cool, scary kind of thing.
It could have been some sort of werewolf thing. Like
it could have been anything. It doesn't make any sense.
Been a lot of things
that were racing through the forest. Whatever.
They insisted on having a ride with the giant tire marquee that you walk through,
which is fine. But then you introduce 13 years later, and at this point would have been a really cute time to retire Rita, or make Rita some sort of crazy beast, and not make Rita a racetrack.
Like by that point, Rita had been open for 5 years, and it would have been okay for them to just rename it entirely. Like.
Or keep the name and make Rita some sort of monster.
Totally.
Like it doesn't have to be the racetrack.
The name Rita Queen of Speed, the Queen of Speed part was dropped for the Dark Forest reskin, and it just became Rita. And like Rita could have meant whatever they wanted it to mean.
But the track could have been painted like dark green or black or something.
And it's like, oh, it's like the escape vehicle. Or you like racing to get out of the Dark Forest?
I don't think that's even what it is. Isn't it just like some abandoned racetrack?
That's allegedly what it is. I looked it up.
Is it really?
I look it up because it's not obvious. It doesn't make sense.
That's really the story.
That's the theme. Yeah.
Okay. Well, Alton Towers, you suck.
Anyway,
let's just abandon Dark Forest before my thought gets
we are in the Towers area of the park. There's not a lot going on here, and the area is like really fudged because everything from like the Skyride station through like the Hex area all the way down to where Spinball Whizzer is, which is like physically attached to CBeebies Land, is considered part of the Towers area. This is the one place that we ate. We ate at the chain Oak Tavern, and the name of this restaurant, it's like a table service restaurant, and the name is a reference to Hex, which is the Vekoma Madhouse ride that sits inside of Alton Towers. And it has this cute little story about, like, a witch that curses his family. And, like, every time a limb falls from the big oak tree, someone in your family will die. And then he chains all of the branches together so that nothing can fall. Like, it's this whole thing. And so they've continued. They make a reference to the Hex ride. In the restaurant, and I remember liking I got like a chicken sandwich or something. It was pretty good. There was something about a donut.
It was very experimental. So first I'm vegetarian, so like my choices are usually pretty limited. And so even though there was kind of like a Mediterranean edge to this restaurant, they didn't have any like falafel dish, which just kind of sucks. But anyway, so the food here does seem to be like the nice food in the park. So I ordered this like
Alistair was like, if you're gonna eat in this park, don't. But if you do,
eat here.
We'll go here.
So we did, and so I got some sort of like vegetarian burger that really didn't taste great, like substance wise. It was supposed to be like mushroom based, I think. But then the bun itself was somehow a glazed donut bun, and then if that wasn't bad enough, they put some sort of like salty like spice mix on top of the donut. So the donut itself felt like almost like za'atar on top of
just the bun itself was like offensive.
But then like all these flavors that they tried to put I mean, it was honestly kind of like fucking terrible. Like it was not good, but you know, you eat it, you're hungry, you got some fries with it, and like, you know, we split a beer and like let's call it a day.
Yeah.
And you know, I can see how this restaurant may be the nicest in Alton Towers, but my particular dish, which I guess like donut burgers is a thing. This country's obsessed with donuts, by the way.
God, what is it with Brits and donuts? Like,
there's way more similarities between Northeast US and the UK than I'd ever imagined possible. So I started really going around the country a couple times. Yeah. I was like, whoa, please hold. Why is everyone eating
into donuts?
Anyway, that aside, and fast food. They just love their fast food. But
pizza buffets. Burgers.
Yeah, the carvery that's practically like an American
Toby carvery.
You know, like what even is that? Sorry, Charlotte and Morgan, if you hear this. But,
I loved it. I loved it.
Anyway, so yeah, the restaurant was certainly a restaurant.
Yeah. And then so also in addition to Hex, in the tower area, there's also the world of David Williams. David Williams is a children's book author.
Poor David Williams.
And it's a small kiddie area that used to be Cloud Cuckoo Land. Like, there was a lot more going on in this area. The cars are technically still Cloud Cuckoo Land, and then the world of David Williams is next to it. Super disjointed.
Yeah.
Super disjointed. There's also the Alton Dungeon up there, which, like, the dungeon is another, like Sea Life. It's another chain of, like, Merlin entertainment venues. So they have like an Alton Towers location, but it costs extra, even if you're a pass holder. You can go to we can go to the Amsterdam dungeon in Amsterdam with our Merlin passes that we own, but you can't go into the Alton Towers.
It's only for UK attractions.
Oh, you're right. Okay, You're right. So there's like one in York. I think there's one in Birmingham. Like, there's other dungeon attractions that are free to us as Merlin pass holders. We bought the cheapest Merlin pass because it actually worked out with our dates. Which is part of why we were able to do Alton Towers for 2.5 days instead of just 2. But yeah, the pass will not get you into the Alton dungeon for free. In fact, I heard that it wasn't even opening this year. They turned it into a haunt last fall, and I don't even know. It used to be a dark ride. It was the Charlie and the Chocolate Factory dark ride when I went in 2015. That was really cute, but then the license ran out on that, and they chucked it, and now it's a haunt basically. So there's a lot of really disjointedness about this alleged area that just contains a bunch of individual attractions. Spinball Wizard is technically also in this area. We'll talk about that in a sec. But in addition to Hex, which is a decent Vekoma Madhouse ride, but where the pre-shows are honestly like the best part because you're in the castle. There's also the Gangsta Granny Dark Ride, which is the centerpiece of the land of David Williams. That whole area is trash. It is poorly maintained. It's cheap. It's not even 5 years old. It looks terrible. David Williams, I don't know who you are, but if you're listening, you deserve better, baby. Like, aside from the Dark Ride, that whole area is ass. And, like, it is desperately needing redevelopment. Now, the Dark Ride is super cool. It's, like, a really compact family dark ride with some really cute scenes. We don't know anything about Gangsta Granny or any of David Williams' franchises, but it was super cute and endearing. And I would assume that fans of the books probably find this to be a very faithful adaptation of the story because I just thought it was adorable. But yeah, that's pretty much rounds out the Towers area of Alton Towers. And then if you go down literally like across the park past X Sector, where Oblivion and Smiler are, you get to Spinball Wizard, which used to be its own little area, just the spinball coaster. It was called Adventureland. Don't know what about it had anything to do with it. It used to be, I will say, it used to be a larger area. Alton Towers loves to just shift things around and throw names around and call things stuff, and they're just like, well, if we call it something, then it is. And it's really not. Spinball Wizard used to be part of a larger plaza that was later colonized by CBeebies land, and so there's a big fence that like winds its way through what used to be one big plaza, so that like Spinball Wizard and the Octonauts coaster are technically right next to each other, but you have to go all the way around CBeebies land to go into the area, to go back to the back of the area to go on the Octonauts coaster, even though they look like they're in the exact same area, these two coasters. Spinball Wizard is a cute ride. It's an average Mauer spinner. It's not particularly memorable. The most memorable thing about it was that Sean actually got measured. That was the one ride of the trip where Sean got measured.
Like, oh, all the height measurements in the UK, no one's going to.
Yeah, Alton Towers doesn't care. They don't do that.
And then like the first ride is like
one ride on Spinball Wizard. They measured him.
That's the only ride in the whole UK though that they measured me.
And it's a cute ride. It
stresses me out.
Pales in comparison to Dragon's Fury
I enjoy Spinball Wizard, so I guess I'm starting to learn things about myself as an enthusiast, right? And this was like an enlightening moment because I'm like, please hold. You're telling me that like these Mauer coasters, like I have been secretly loving them a little bit, you know. And then
we're big fans of Crush's coaster at Disneyland Paris.
Yeah, and in Tarantula in Parque de Atracciones de Madrid, it's like an awesome ride.
And Winjas,
is pretty good.
There's lots of good examples of these rides.
But then I ride them kind of infrequently to the point where like I kind of forget, like, oh, you know, and like I enjoy it in the moment.
It's easy to forget how good these rides are, like as a pedigree.
But then we rode this, and I was like, oh, this is good, and taking photos. Like, you know what? It kind of has like a pretty decent scope to it. And I'm starting to realize, like, okay, like Tarantula I like a lot. And then a couple days later, we rode Dragon's Fury, which we'll talk about in a separate episode.
That's at Chessington.
And I was like, oh my freaking god. Mauer spinners are honestly like my fave.
That ride's amazing.
But yeah, Spinball Wizard quite good.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed it. I thought that there was some pretty decent sized drops on it, actually.
It does have a cool looking layout with like the double U-turn half pipe sequence like laid into it. It could use, it was themed to Sonic the Hedgehog for 10 years. It opened as Spinball Wizard, and then it had a Sonic the Hedgehog licensing that lasted, I think, 10 years. Now it's back to Spinball Wizard. I wish they had just themed it into something else. Like, this is another, it's another thing like Rita, where I feel like there's not something super marketable about this theme or this aesthetic, so you might as well make it look nice. And it doesn't look that nice. The area around the pinball area around the coaster feels like a Chinese park that like built something 15 years ago and just kind of let it rot. All the bright colors, lots of primary colors: red, yellow, orange, red, yellow, blue.
Like Chinese over there,
and it just feels like why is there a commitment to this aesthetic and this theme and this ride that is like on its own? It doesn't have any other area beholding to it. Like, it could be whatever they wanted it to be, and they just choose for it to still be this weird like primary color pinball coaster experience. But in any case,
it's funny, yeah, because I feel like it's right next to X Sector. Well, not even that. Maybe not.
Yeah.
Super,
no, you still have to walk through the horrible purple walkway.
Yeah, the walkway with purple fences.
The purple
fence
white
fences or green
and
fences.
And you have to go past the ugly arcade bunker.
Game bunker?
The game bunker.
Oh my god.
One of Alton Towers' many temporarily permanent buildings.
They look terribly out of place.
That you feel like you could just blow it away in a windstorm.
Yeah, so I will say, I feel like the weird thing about Spinball Wizard is that it's a really cool ride, and I think that it's a decent enough scope that it fits in that park, because it is not a small ride. Like, for a spinning coaster, it's quite big. And so in my head, I'm like, okay, so this park struggles with being able to like do a proper redo or something, because they could have just repainted it, made it, I don't even care, all black for all I care, and it could have done some sort of whatever more naturalistic or supernatural theme to it, and it would have been perfectly fine. Like, I feel like stuff like this, like, it's almost like they're so cheap that keeping it Spinball Wizard, which is like zero theming. I mean, there's like a little wooden fence in the queue. I mean, there's nothing. There's no theming.
To some of these theme choices and like name choices, it just reeks of cheapness. And
like, they could have done something really cool with this ride, because it's a decent enough size. They could have planted a couple more trees or plants, and they could have made like a wooden station out of it, and it could have been some sort of, it could have been anything. But Spinball Wizard feels like a Six Flagsy kind of coaster. Like,
you got parks in mainland Europe, like Bobbejaanland Land and Attraction Park Hellendoorn, that like rename and retheme and reskin rides like it's their job. Like, there is such a commitment to...
I mean, Naga Bay, which is another one of these awesome Mauer spinners.
Yeah.
It used to be Diz, and now it's themed to whatever supernatural thing next to
parks,
Fury.
especially parks in Europe, demonstrate such an eagerness to tell stories with rides and tell new stories with existing rides when there's an opportunity to do something more substantial. And like, every chance that Alton Towers has had to like do this, they have kind of shied away from it.
But having said that, I did like the ride.
It was a good ride.
And then we also rode Octonauts.
CBeebies Land.
CBeebies Land is cute, like, good for the kids. I mean, it was terribly out of place in this park, but that's, I mean, we at this point, you know that already.
Yeah.
So, CBeebies is a
TV channel.
Yeah, no, sorry.
Oh, yeah. CBeebies is a TV. Yeah, Octonauts is a
show on the channel, and it is the coaster itself is a Zero.
I think it's a Zero. It's a custom.
I should know this.
It's a custom layout.
Quite cute. It has like this wheel that spouts water at you as you go by. We get a couple times.
We're in a submarine, and the lead car is like themed to an actual submarine.
Actually, kind of liked it. We'll have some photos on the website about that. So go to thecoasterkings.com, and you'll for this episode there'll be some photos. But let's go ahead and head over to. Now we're going to talk about some big. So
now we're
coasters.
talking. We have on our day. You wouldn't have actually gone to Spinball Wizard before going to X Sector, but because it's the Towers area, we talked about it in that context. You would have gone like Dark Forest, and then worked your way around Gangsta Granny and Hex, and then X Sector, and then Spinball Wizard and CBeebies Land. But now let's talk about X Sector, which is one of the best areas in this park. It's one of the areas in this park that like really works.
I think X Sector is like one of those legendary areas, because of course you've seen Oblivion being added. You used to have Dark Hole there, Black Hole, Black Hole. Black Hole. There used to be the Inverter. There used to be like
Submission and Enterprise.
Yeah, and Enterprise is awesome, and it fits so well exactly where Oblivion, wraps around. So I feel like over the course of the years, everyone has seen X Sector, my god, I cannot speak today.
It was a really nice counterbalance because tonally it's similar to Forbidden Valley and like what they did with Nemesis, but instead of it being like naturalistic and supernatural, it's very industrial and it has all these hard lines, edges.
To me, it kind of feels like
silver,
almost like a futuristic kind of idea. So, of course, this land is home to Oblivion and Smiler at this point. So we'll start with Oblivion because Oblivion is really historically significant for the coaster, coaster industry, the theme park industry, being the first vertical dive coasters, they called it, having 8 across seating, and then, strange enough, they can run 8 trains on this at the time. 8
trains.
If I'm not mistaken, or 6 trains. 6 trains, maybe 8 trains. Crazy amounts. The ride doesn't do anything but drop, and then go up in like a turn back to the station. And we have both ridden this in Taiwan as well, the clone of it. But for me, that was my first. Actually, you rode the one in Taiwan first too.
I rode the one in Taiwan because I rode the one
in
Alton Towers
first too.
Yeah, like 6 months apart, just like you.
So for me, and for Alex too, I guess, we have both ridden the G5 dive coaster in Taiwan first, and that's the same layout except for it is on the side of a mountain,
and it's a mirror image. But
so the drop is very small, and then you have your entire return to the station is that giant swooping upwards turn. Into like a little bit of like an airtime hop into the brake run, which is all the ride does, but it's incredibly elevated in Taiwan, because it's on the side of a mountain, as where in the original design is Oblivion, and it was designed to just dive 80 feet on the ground and then come back up.
So Oblivion is 60 feet off the ground, but the drop is 180 feet.
180.
So you have a 12-story underground portion of the ride. This ride was incredibly expensive. It was more expensive than Nemesis, and it was supposed to be the next Nemesis. But unfortunately, even though it was pioneering a new concept and did something that was objectively very cool, it was considered a disappointment compared to Nemesis. It wasn't quite the marketing faff that 13 was, but it is kind of a kindred to 13. I feel like 13... in the way that it was a prototype of a ride and then would later be done so much better in so many different places. Oblivion is a good example of a ride that hasn't aged particularly well just because what it does is done so much better on so many other coasters. The one thing that Oblivion does that is cool is just the fact that the underground tunnel is so long and the drop, so much of it is hidden underground.
It's like your roller coaster couldn't dream,
digging so far, so deep. I remember pulling up on YouTube like a documentary special from 1997 about when they were excavating to build this ride, and it looks incredible. It is so much further down than it seems. Even when you're riding it, it doesn't feel like the drop is that tall. It doesn't feel like 180 feet. It's not until you ride the one in Taiwan that you realize
it's a massive
how much
coaster.
Ride is hiding underground. So it was an incredible expense. I mean, you build a coaster with 8 trains. That's expensive. Everything about this ride was expensive. I mean, it was objectively successful. It just wasn't recapturing the success of Nemesis. In fact, they never recaptured that until Smiler.
Being at close to 1,000 coasters, for me, it was like, all right, Nemesis, I appreciate... Not Nemesis, sorry, Oblivion. I appreciate Oblivion. And of course, it's like dressed up nicely with that drop. You can walk all the way around it, like the fog tunnel, like that 90s music, the aesthetic.
Love the music and the story. The story is basically like a very George Orwellian... It's very 1984 about like compliance, submission, hence the name of the flat ride that they had there, and about like erasure and Oblivion. Like basically, the subjects on Oblivion have been subject to erasure from society. It's very like social apocalypse kind of.
Which is funny because it kind of course, feeds into Smiler. But to go back to the ride, being close to 1,000 coasters, riding it, I was like, all right, I appreciate it for what it did for the industry, and it was kind of like a legend back in its day. It's very cool, but I just ridden the one that I think is superior in Taiwan, and so riding it, I was kind of disappointed, and it kind of ran a little bit rough for me, like it bounced a bit, not really a bounce, it's kind of like, okay, the track is maybe it's time for replacement.
It's getting old.
And
the bottom of the drop.
If you think about how much this ride has operated in its lifetime, and sometimes running 8 trains at a time, I mean, there's trains dropping all the time. Anyway, from a nerd perspective, the ride design is actually kind of cool because instead of using tire drives on the top of the turnaround, because actually like every turn on this ride is quite literally like a block section because they can run 8 trains on a ride that has 1 drop and 1 turn, right? Yeah. So it's all brakes. But what was so cool is instead of having tire drive that has a sidewards chain lift. So you ride on the side of a chain.
It's like a giant
It looks
hog.
really weird. And then, of course, you have your holding drop. So, and then when you get back to the station, there is, if I'm not mistaken, another chain turn. Is there a chain turn?
Yeah.
So it really, I thought from like a nerve perspective, it was a really cool B&M because I've never seen a sideways
It's a three-sided triangle, and two of those corners have chains to like separate the trains around. Now, when they did the one in Taiwan, they only bought like 2 or 3 trains for it. The need for capacity was not there. And the one in Taiwan, it feels a lot newer and like
runs
fresher because it has a lot less mileage on it compared to Oblivion. But yeah, it was set up in such a way where like they could load 2 trains at a time, they could unload 2 trains, they'd have 2 trains going on the lift and like 2 trains in the brake run. And
no, the station only holds 2 trains. It doesn't hold 4 trains.
Oh, okay.
It holds 2 trains, so it unloads and loads 2 at a time.
Yeah, so probably 6 train operation was, I think, the most they could really conceivably do with this ride. They'd have 2 loading, 2 on the lift, drop sequence, and 2 in the brake run, basically.
Yeah.
Which was incredible. Like, they really could get people in and out of this ride.
High capacity ride. But yeah, so I enjoy what the ride did for the industry, and riding it was kind of cool, and aesthetically speaking, it's very fun. It has a 90s soundtrack.
Yeah.
But for me, it was pretty low on the list of rides in the park. Smiler, however, was really high on the list, and Smiler is, of course, the 14 inverting, almost killing machine that
the ride
theme
torture
incident.
That actually tortured.
So the theme is like
people.
A psychological kind of like
psychological torture.
Yeah, it's like an experiment, right?
The smilification process,
where you go and you get pretty much experimented on, and the Smiler is kind of a creep theme like that, just like everything else. But it definitely feels like it fits in the X sector. So this coaster, once upon a time, had 5 trains. Now in 2015, there was an incident where one of the trains valleyed between 2 of the elements towards the far end of the ride.
On the namesake Smiler element.
And when one of the trains got stuck there and didn't return to the station, it wouldn't allow the dispatch of the train in the station because everything was kind of blocked back. It was kind of backed up due to blocking, and that's because the actual sensor system worked properly and said, can't dispatch this train because the blocks are blocked and there's a train that hasn't made it to the next block, which is because it valleyed. Anyway, the ride operator, if I'm not mistaken, themselves overrode the system and put it in maintenance mode, allowing them to dispatch despite the blocks not being cleared. And so they dispatched a train, and then 2 trains collided, causing severe injuries for many riders, for all however many riders on the train.
The people in the front row of the train that had the collision, 2 people lost a leg.
So, but this was kind of like a really important pivotal point in the timeline for Merlin Entertainments, which is why I'm bringing it up, because this kind of led to a lot of decay in the parks, the budget cutting, the lack of very many investments in a row, because Merlin Entertainment and Tussauds before that are really good about like constant additions. I mean, like these parks are firing out massive projects, and they were popular, they were well attended, these parks were doing well. And then that kind of killed the buzz, and they killed off a lot of rides around Alton Towers.
It's been 10 years, and it still feels like they are still getting their footing, like financially and like marketing-wise and like brand, like image-wise, in the context of this incident.
And so the ride itself is a legend, not just for that, but it's also because it's still the most inverting roller coaster in the world. It has 14 inversions, 2 lift hills, kind of a racing element to it. It's a dispatcher properly, so it's an incredibly spectacular ride, and it's actually a terrain coaster built on the side of a hill, meaning that all the elements slowly become further down, which is why they're able to do big elements and keep the pacing up so well for the entire ride, despite it being 14 long inversions, and it's all very tight. It's like a giant spaghetti bowl. It's one of those rides that we're probably never ever going to see again, and which is why it's so phenomenal. And it really was like one of these bucket list coasters.
It was cool. Like I said, that was our number one priority. We walked in the park, and we're like, we need to go to Smiler. And we rode it 5 times.
Total, yeah.
And it's awesome. It's really cool. It's rough. It's
definitely a Gerslauer.
There's some moments on that ride that will beat the piss out of you, especially if you're on the wing seats. But, it's really cool. We are not ones to shy away from rides that box you in the head, because some of those rides are still very spectacular despite those issues. And it feels less of, we take more issue with rides that don't track particularly well or vibrate and have that fiberglass rattle when a ride feels like it's not being super well maintained. But then when you have a ride that's just got like track imperfections and stuff, it's like, well, at least it's rolling nicely. It rolls through about as well as it can. It's just the way that it's designed. It doesn't feel like the train is fighting the track. So like we'll take a hit here and there. There's like 3 or 4 moments on Smileware that like get you in the
I mean, they had to get creative with supporting it,
but it's just so with cool. Shaping like I can't even be mad.
They had to get really creative with the support shaping and the track shaping, not to fit all this stuff in. And the ride lived up to expectations. Then they quite exceeded because it was a little rougher than I expected. But riding it a couple times, I mean, I thought it was freaking phenomenal. One of the best rides that I think the world's ever seen. It's just one of those rides where, like I said earlier, they're not going to make it like that ever again.
It's quite impressive because even with 14 inversions, it didn't feel excessive.
Yeah, because unlike the 10 inversion coasters like Sick and Colossus we rode on the trip as well, this 14 inversions, they're practically all different. You've got a couple dive loops, you've got like a sea serpent roll, cobra roll, like some weird double loop thing. That's kind of what the Smile. That was actually where the ride
double dive loop. Like there's some great moments.
Yeah, it's really cool. And then you have just like a really standard big corkscrew in the middle of the ride, and you have like a couple of inline twists. Like it's really cool. Like downward rolls. I mean, of course, like everything is being done in this ride to create 14 inversions, but it doesn't feel repetitive.
Yeah,
which is crazy. And there's a nice break in the middle of the ride before you hit the second lift, which is a vertical lift hill. And it's really refreshing because you kind of need
the breather
that.
Is good. It's
because seven inversions, you just need.
Yeah,
you need it to breathe for a second.
Somehow, riding Sick or Colossus feels more taxing when you're at the end of your 5th consecutive barrel roll versus what Smileware does, where everything feels very unique.
And surprisingly, there's a great airtime moment on Smileware.
There's a couple, yeah.
But one that's really phenomenal, where like you really dive to the low part of the ride. Again, it's on a hill. Which you can't really tell it's on the hill because the whole thing is like a black mesh of track, but it really is like on a hillside. And so when you dive into the last valley for one of the turnaround elements,
the Cobra Roll
particularly, it is a airtime laden like moment, like a good mid-ride drop coming out of nowhere, and then boom, you hit the element.
Strong,
really good ride.
Yeah.
So Smile definitely hits first, and that's one of those Alton Tower legends. And
yeah.
And in my head, I was like, oh, that's probably going to be like the last legend that we're going to really ride. And then Wickerman is not going to feel like that because Wickerman is newer. But again, they managed to make Wickerman feel like that kind of production, despite it being kind of a small coaster.
Mm-hmm.
And so then we're going to head over to the far end of the park, where it's also where you can leave the park and be right at the parking lot.
Yeah.
And this is the Forbidden Valley, which is home to actually quite a few rides, including... Well, I guess there's an area called Gloomy Wood.
So there's Gloomy Wood, which is like a small area that is right in between Catania Canyon and Forbidden Valley, and it just has one ride. It's really just a little plaza, and it's their classic Haunted House Dark ride, which it was built as the Haunted House in the early 90s, and then it was rethemed as a shooting dark ride in the 2000s called Duel, and now it has turned back into a traditional dark ride. It's called The Curse at Alton Manor. Really great little ride. Like, it's long. It's got a lot of props, lots of effects. It has an original storyline. Like, it's got a lot of really good stuff going for it. We only rode it once because Alton Towers time is always of the essence. But it was a great ride, and it has a great little area. It has a nice presence in its little individual area. But then just past it is the threshold into Forbidden Valley, which tells this larger overarching story.
Especially with the new Nemesis Reborn, if you really tied it all together, and Toxicator is there now.
It's like there was this alien crash site. The alien is like there, but it's
so Nemesis is the alien, Nemesis is the monster, and so they have three rides that are themed to Nemesis, the monster, the alien monster, and the whole thing is that like this government agency is like kind of working with this monster. You can go visit some of the sites.
They said it was like it's in a vegetative state or like it's in a subdued state, but then it's really not.
And then there's a whole seek the truth. Like it's not really.
There's like conspiracies about it. Like
so it's kind of like it's like an Area 51 Alton Towers take. And so one of the rides.
That's a good way to describe it.
One of the rides is of course Nemesis. We'll talk about it in a second. But another ride is Nemesis in Subterra, which is a well themed kind of psychological thriller, kind of horror ride, which I kind of really liked it. I was actually pleasantly surprised.
I like it too, and I did it 10 years. It was closed for a really long time. It ran from 2012 to 2015, but it was one of the rides that was like victim of the post-Smileware incident budget cuts. Alton Towers either permanently demolished or suspended operations of 6 different rides after the Smiler incident. And one of them was the Charlie and the Chocolate Factory ride. Hex closed for several years. Nemesis Subterra was closed for like 7 or 8 years. Ripsaw, their original top spin in Forbidden Valley, was chucked. And then some of the other couple smaller rides got chucked. But yeah, so this ride has only, for as long as it's been there physically, it's only operated for about half of the time that it has physically existed. So it's been around for a while.
So what this ride is it's a kind of like a mini drop tower thematic theatrical experience. So it's, we're going to visit the lair of
there's a nest.
Nemesis, and then that nest there is like some eggs, and then they're gonna like showcase one of the eggs. Like they've tested it, and it's completely safe, of course not. And so you get
famous
inside,
last words,
and you board these vehicles that are actually kind of restrictive. So they may make a big deal out of like putting everything back, and then it pushes restraint on you. Anyway, it's like a shared restraint. You have to balance the train out. It's kind of the vehicle out. It's kind of a thing. Anyway, you're sitting in this. You're in a square, so you're in
this like chamber, so you can view one of the eggs that has been made available for.
And of course, some shit goes wrong, and everything gets dark, and the egg is definitely like
suddenly the egg hatches,
and you drop down,
and you fall through the floor,
and then there's more hatched eggs, and lights go off again, and there's like air guns, of course, and there's poking, and there's water dripping, and there's growling, like it's very much a 4D kind of experience, kind of horror-ish. And then you are lifted back up to be disembarked.
Level.
And then when you disembark, you go into these theatrical elevators
and they like evacuate
to bring it back
you.
up.
Like the ride ends and the restraints come up, and the staff are like evacuating you.
Yeah.
And you go through like a maze, and that's why this ride needs the bag check thing. The valet bag thing is like very important for this ride because you can't just put the shit on the floor.
Also because you literally drop, the floor disappears.
And then the floor disappears, so yeah.
So anyway, and then you're stuck in the elevator and stuff goes wrong, and then eventually you make it out.
Yeah.
And it's actually kind of a cool experience. Yeah. I liked it a lot.
It's different.
It's very different, and it works very well.
If you are a fan of Walt Disney World, especially Walt Disney World in the 90s, everything we have just described probably sounds a lot like the extraterrestrial alien encounter. And not even just similarities to that ride, but similarities to the film Alien, starring Sigourney Weaver. In the case of like the egg exploding, and like that's like was actually originally what extraterrestrial alien encounter was supposed to be themed to. So like not only does this ride take a lot of influences from this old Disney attraction, but also from the movie that had originally inspired the Disney attraction. Alien Encounter's long gone. Even its cheap, flimsy replacement, the Stitch Encounter, is gone. But if you're a fan of that ride and you wish that you could do something that is in the same vein of that ride, Nemesis Subterra is awesome. It is so... It feels like a better execution, frankly, of the Alien Encounter type attraction, because unlike Alien Encounter, which was mostly a show, this incorporates the ride element of it having like a drop where you fall through the floor and are brought back up. And is it the most perfect or satisfying attraction? Not necessarily. This was the attraction that came off the heels of the immense social disappointment of 13, and like at the time Nemesis Subterra did not do a lot to like improve the vibe.
I think it's such a nice addition though.
It's the kind of thing where
like supporting acts.
I think as an enthusiast, as a fan of dark rides, as a fan of stuff like Alien Encounter, like it's easy to appreciate and love, but the average Alton Tower guest, I don't think it translated well. It was a long time for people to warm up to it. There's a reason why, even though it was only 3 years old, the park chose to suspend operations for it when the money got tight, because the operating cost in relationship to the ridership was upside down.
See, for me, being a first-time visitor, Alton Towers, this felt like a quintessential experience that really added to this valley's whole vibe, because then there's also Toxicator, which is just a new top spin that they just added this season. That is practically replacing an old top spin that was cut years ago during the whole situation with, cutting edges for Smiler. Yeah. And so, but now it's themed to being the blood of the Nemesis monster somehow toxicating to something else. So like
it's some sort of like harvesting. I don't really know what the theme is.
So it looks cool. There's cool screens on it where you can see that the blood of the monster is in there, and then like as the ride is processing and it's doing its flips,
like a siphon.
It then turns all green, like toxic green, Toxicator, as the rest, as like the whole aesthetic of the ride. And it's built on top of the midway, so you walk underneath it in this tunnel where there's like leakage and there's water effects. It's honestly a very nicely...
It's really...
very nicely themed.
My first thought was like, oh, they're doing another top spin where they used to have a top spin. No, this ride was a great choice. First, it's a suspended Huss top spin, so it's like a little more going on than like the old Top Spin 2 that Ripsaw was. Although it's funny because like in 2025, a suspended Huss top spin feels very like 20 years ago, kind of like that's when Knott's Berry Farm built theirs and like Valley Fair is 2005. Most of the Huss suspended top spins are already gone because they've had mechanical issues. So it's amazing to see a new one built. And it ran a pretty good program. Again, it looks cool. It has a great vibe. It's neat that like it's literally on top of the midway. It's cool for two reasons. One, because when you're on the midway, you really get to like marvel at the experience. And it's got the fountains, just like how Ripsaw did. So like the fountains can like, you get kind of wet, you get splashed like as you're walking under it. And also it elevates the ride. You get some height on it. Makes you realize that like top spins can feel like a very low to the ground experience. Especially in a park like Alton Towers. Any chance you get to like put something on a pedestal and give it some height and have height be part of the experience is like a rare and unique opportunity worth taking. I wasn't planning on riding it. Sean's not big on these kinds of rides, so I wasn't going to ride it. And then I decided to ride it real quick. Like, I have a single rider line. I got on real quick, had a great time. Sean took pictures of me. Like, I'm so glad I rode it because it was a really fun ride. And I think it's a great addition to this area.
It works really well. And because Galactica doesn't necessarily share the aesthetic, which I wouldn't be surprised if at some point they're going to turn that into also something themed.
Yeah, Galactica's
because right now they're still playing the VR videos and it hasn't had VR in years. So, but Toxicated feels like a nice kind of transitional ride that is themed to Nemesis, but aesthetically speaking kind of works as a general theme.
Yeah.
To then transition to the more futuristic-y Air Galactica area.
I hope that this is a trend that is beginning, because Alton Towers has been losing flat rides during the tougher money periods, especially post-COVID. Merlin was already having a tough time when COVID happened. After COVID, they resorted to filling some of the gaps in their lineup, physical and figurative gaps, with the Retro Squad, which were a series of fairground flat rides that they had on loan, just to like offer some more things to do. They had like a waltzer and some other like spinny stuff. They had one down in the X sector where Enterprise used to be. Now it's like a food truck area that like wasn't even open for us on our visit. I hope Toxicator is an indicator that they will be adding more flat rides. Because Alton Towers just has a hard time with ride retention right now. It feels like for everything that they add, they lose. They added Toxicator, which was replacing a top spin, but it also was added at the same time that they lost their pirate ship ride, the Blade, which was an original, like an older flat ride that was in the X sector area. So like it still feels like no matter how often they add a ride, it seems like they're also removing a ride. I hope they can get to a point where everything that's operating in the park has like a good lifespan ahead of it, and they can actually fill some of these vacancies with like supporting act rides and not have vacancies left over. Because right now, Dark Forest and X Sector both have 2 e-ticket coasters, nothing else to do. No flat rides, nothing. X Sector used to be like this well-rounded area with 2 flat rides and 2 coasters, and so did Dark Forest when it was Ugland. And when they added Rita, it's like 2 coasters, 2 flat rides. That was like a good formula that they had. All the major areas in the park had like 2 marquee flat rides, 2 marquee coasters, and that was a great formula. And now Forbidden Valley is the only area in the park that seems like it has a full roster of attractions, like an actually fully realized, fleshed out area with multiple things to do. And then it only just recently started to get to feeling like that with the vacancy left by Ripsaw being filled with another topspin. But anyways, that pretty much leaves us to the last 2 coasters, 2 like
which I think are really high in my list,
major coasters.
So we'll start with Nemesis. Nemesis, that's of course like the Legend of Park.
Nemesis Reborn.
Now it's Reborn. So the new B&M did it.
Yeah. So with Nemesis, so the story is that with 20 years of consistent 30 years really. Yeah, it ran for 30 years, Nemesis. And they had a long-term like service life for this ride that was related mostly to the footers and the way that they were connected to the rock that they had blasted. And rebuilding the footers was going to eventually be a necessary adjustment to the ride, which would cost like millions of dollars. And in the process, not only did they rebuild the footers, they ended up demolishing the original Nemesis, with the exception, I think, of like maybe I think the station and the brake runs are still there. The lift hill, I think, may have. Charlotte told me this, and I forgot, but there's stuff left over. It's very in the same vein of the Incredible Hulk retrack at Islands of Adventure, except Hulk reused the footers, whereas with Nemesis, part of the reason they were doing this was because of the footers. And since they were going to be going through the trouble of doing that, you might as well replace the whole ride and like extend the service life another 30 years. So they build a brand new coaster, Nemesis Reborn. It's black with red veins. Like they really lean into the monster thing. And like Sean said, like they use this as an opportunity to like really reinvent the area's theme. Nemesis Subterra, which had been closed for a long time, reopens. And then they added Toxicator this year. So like they are really going all in for the new, like the version of this area, this new Nemesis version that has like conspiracy theories and government intervention. It used to be a lot more generalized, like it was a monster. It was a coaster, it was a monster, like that was the theme. Now there's like a much bigger overarching story, and the reborn Nemesis is like the focal point of that. They have an audio animatronic monster eye with teeth like at the center of the ride by the station. That is like a really nice storytelling touch for this coaster. The coaster runs, to me, it runs as well as it did when I rode it in 2015. It's a little rattlier. It suffers a little bit from like the rattliness, the fiberglass rattle of like some of B&M's newer projects, but it runs fast. It is faster than I remember it being, and I would be lying if I said that I wasn't just as satisfied with the new Nemesis as I was with the old one, which is to Alton Towers and B&M's credit. And it's just a great ride. Like it feels, everything about it that was so wonderful about it in 1994 still is intact. The ride is timeless. It's a genius ride. It is the kind of ride that you don't intentionally build. It is a ride that happens when you have to. It's one of those like necessity breeds innovation things. They had a type of ride that hadn't even been built yet because like the project, like we said in the beginning of the episode, predated the original Batman the Ride. It was just a concept. And they had a plot of land that they wanted to use, but they had this issue with the height, with the tree line, and they risked it all. They spent all this money blasting the rock, and they built this coaster with a really, in retrospect, was an extremely unorthodox series of events for this type of coaster. Because B&M inverts, it's like, yeah, we start with a big sweeping drop, vertical loop, maybe like a 0G roll. You know, this one, it starts with a corkscrew. Because that's like part of the first drop sequence. Yeah, you have a little stop, like right off the edge of into a corkscrew, into this amazing 270 degree. It's the best part of the ride, in my opinion. It's this 270 downward helix that dives down under the midway and then into the 0G roll.
And then the 0G roll currently goes past the monster's eye, which has like some claws around it. Yeah. And then you fly through like a little bit of fog. Again,
always the fog.
Merlin. And then as you dive down from that, you're kind of in like the lowest part of the ride, or second lowest part, and you make your way up the hill. There's like a waterfall you skate by.
Yeah.
And then you turn around past the queue.
A sharp U-turn.
And then you dive around, and then you have your vertical loop.
And you hit the loop.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. And then you do...
Hey, not everybody listening to this has ridden this ride. Anyway, but my point is that...
Well, I'm trying to describe the ride layout, and every time I say an element, you repeat the element.
I'm supporting you.
Oh, appreciate it.
I'm supporting you.
Okay. So after the vertical loop, you go into yet another tunnel, which is then followed by what used to be kind of a slow turnaround hill, as Alex would describe it, and now you kind of fly through it.
Yeah.
And another dive into a tunnel, fog, go figure. And corkscrew, very tight, pretty much almost like a Black Mamba level.
Yeah.
You know, where like it's really buried in the ground. It just kind of, goes between tunnels. And then you have a helix upward into the brake run. And this ride is flying. I could not believe it. I kind of thought like, the original must have been like zippy, super smooth, and this one maybe a little bit slower. But like Alex said, it was probably faster than the original, right?
That turn before the last corkscrew was what made me realize that this ride was running faster than I was led to expect based on my 2015 ride. Because when I rode in 2015, it like met all of my expectations, loved it, favorite invert, had the same kind of reaction that everybody else had to it, except that turn between the vertical loop and the corkscrew felt like the one part of the ride that did not feel like a highlight. And almost like it felt like it was going too slowly for the banking. And then
is it banked the same?
Like it is banked the same. Yeah. I swear to God, it's banked the same, and it just goes faster. It just runs faster than I remember because that turn does not feel like a dead space on Nemesis Reborn. It feels like you are hauling ass, and you do not actually have time to catch your breath before the final corkscrew.
Not at all. There's no time to breathe on that ride.
When I rode in 2015.
What I do want to say about the new B&M is that it does feel a little bit rattly at some points, like a little bit bouncy, like a little bit like we would expect from what everyone's saying about the new B&M.
Post-COVID,
you know, like
B&M.
Yeah, like Mental Mayhem at Chessington,
Iron Menace.
Yeah, or
Penguin Trek, Phoenix Rising.
It's all kind of like, it doesn't track very well. But only in a few rides I noticed it, only in a few moments. Generally speaking, the thing is so relentlessly fast. It's just non-stop. There's not really any time to even really feel that.
It's so good at what it does that, like, any imperfections just don't feel like... They don't feel like imperfections. They're just,
if anything, it feel kind of like character.
Blows right through them.
And I thought I would not like the weird vein thing on the side of the track, but I really didn't mind it. It kind of works.
It didn't, when they first did it, I was like, oh, that's interesting. And then now looking at it, it's like, okay, I get it. It's nice. It's a nice flourish on the ride. Like, not only does it look good, but it also, what it says to me is like, we're spending money on this. Like, we're not doing this cheaply. It doesn't feel like it's
faded or anything, even though it's already like 2 years old, the track. Yeah. So that's good. And then one of the biggest highlights for me was the original B&M flying coaster. Is it the original? Yes, the original.
Yeah, it is the OG.
So this coaster previously known as Air, and I will never not call it Air. I call it Air the whole trip. It's currently called Galactica after in 2016 they added the VR to it.
Yeah, as far as I'm concerned, it's only really Galactica if you do the VR.
Yeah,
which doesn't exist anymore. So it
should just be Air.
They even reference it in like some of the when you're exiting like your little monorail and you're looking up at the screens that they have, and it's like advertising people riding rides. And there's like a little bit in there about Galactica, but in the top right corner it says Galactica, in the bottom left corner it says Air, with like the original logo and everything. And this is new. Like, this is new, like,
do you think they're gonna bring it back to Air?
I don't know if they'll call it Air again, but they need to do something with the they've got to do something with this Galactica, because like you said, all the videos and stuff in the ride, like the queue and stuff, reference.
Yeah, and talk about how everyone's traveling in their own little pod, and we're going to all these places that we're going to see through the portals.
It's literally like a travel agency. It's like you're boarding your spacecraft, and you're going to see these incredible places, and it's like, it hasn't had the VR in like 7 years.
Yeah, so all we're going to see is like the same grass that we've been skating over.
Yeah.
So anyway, but thematically, the ride doesn't make a lot of sense right now. But I will say it really is like a cool flying coaster. It feels a little bit prototypey, but it doesn't have that crazy intensity to it that like a pretzel loop would offer. It is by far like the most family-friendly, gentle flying coaster, but it's also like a super terrain flying coaster. Like, you're always, because it's Alton Towers, very close to the ground. So every moment you're on this ride, you're just tracing the terrain, and I love it. And when you don't go and you're back instead of having a pretzel loop, you have like a big turnaround, and then you go back down into a drop in a little tunnel, and then you go by some flower beds, and then there's a little... then there's a little
My
twist.
favorite part is when you're, like, hovering right over the midway. And it's, like, people look so close, like, you could almost reach out and grab someone's hand.
Yeah, and then, like, after your little inline twist, you have a couple of hops over the maintenance barn and over, some grass, and then you do, like, a small little cute little dive into some turnaround. And all of it's very cute, and it's not fast, and it doesn't go high, and there's no big drops. But I appreciate that ride so much for being so different, because usually on a flying coaster, it's like, all right, guys, from the lift hill, we're looking down, and we know we're about to get murdered.
Yeah.
Stuff is always intense. I enter Tatsu's pretzel loop, and I'm always like, race. Oh, God, here we go. Like,
brace.
Freaks me out a little bit because it's so intense. Air, chill, bro. It's just Air.
A vibe.
Air is like,
it's a whole vibe.
That's why it should be called Air.
And when it was Air, the aesthetic was amazing.
You're like going with the wind.
When this ride opened, it suffered from comparisons with Nemesis. So basically, when they built Nemesis, they spent exactly 20 years trying to build another Nemesis, and they failed every time in varying degrees. Some were like big failures, like 13, and some of them were like still decent and liked. And I think Air was somewhere in the middle. It was more substantial than Oblivion, but it was far less thrilling.
I mean, original concepts for it called to go about like waterfalls and it was supposed to be like a Nemesis kind of like tunnel, like excavating experience, and it's not. But it doesn't have to be. I really enjoy Air, and it's one of my favorites at the park. Yeah. I
think it's another one of those rides where like if you go in and take it for what it is, you can really appreciate it. Sean, it was your last B&M flyer to complete the set of operating coasters.
Boom. All B&M flyers in the world collected.
I was like, you're going to appreciate this ride because it is so different from
and
all
it's
the
OG,
other
so it's a full
flyers.
circle moment. I wrote the original B&M flyer as my last B&M flyer, and I have all the B&M flyers in the world, and it's quite hard that I really do enjoy it.
Yeah.
And this is a great way to end the episode.
Because you ride air, and then you leave. Right to the right. That's it.
There's a cute little exit to the parking lot, and then you're right there at the cars.
Suddenly you realize that you have walked so far from the entrance of the park to Galactica that you're actually way closer to your car than you realized. You just pop right out.
Yeah, so no long mono ride to stay back unless you like if you're at the part of the park, you just right there. And that is a great place to finish. And I would definitely recommend finishing your day in Forbidden Valley because that is just the coolest rides are there.
Wrapping up on Nemesis or Galactica. Yeah. Especially if Galactica's running one train like it was on one of our days.
Or Nemesis. The Nemesis is running one train
Sometimes
one
Nemesis,
days. And we had to wait like 4 or 5 minutes at the end of the day.
So it's definitely, if one of those coasters is running one train, which like with Merlin, you never know. It's a great one to hop in line for right before park close. And then once you're off and done, you were right there. You were right at the exit. If you are staying on property at one of the 3 or 4 or maybe 5 Alton Towers resort accommodations, you can use this entrance as an entrance. They have, I don't know if they have early ride time for guests, but the rides do open right at 10 o'clock. In fact, you can get into the park. One of the things I like about Alton Towers is while it's only open, the rides are only open for 6 hours, the park itself is actually open for more like 7. Because you can go into the park starting at 9 and walk to whatever ride you're going to start your day with and wait for it to open. Like Sean said, when we rode 13, we were there, and at 9:45, the ride was open, ready to go. And by the time the park's rides officially opened at 10, we had already ridden 13 twice. So in that same vein, if you're a guest at the hotel, you can walk right into X Sector, walk right into Forbidden Valley, hop in line for Galactica or Nemesis first thing. Before the rides open officially at 10, which is a great asset, I think, for staying there. There's a couple of good reasons to stay at those on-site resorts. One of them being that little side entrance, and the other one, I think, the main one being that you don't have to do that drive back and forth a bunch. But yeah, that concludes your efficient day of Alton Towers. Your ride on Galactica, and then out the exit and right to your car. And then you're left with the final thoughts, your analysis of your day at Alton Towers. You ask yourself, like, how nice is this park? It is a beautiful park. It has a reputation for being one of the most, if not the most beautiful parks in the world. And it's juxtaposed with things that are not so beautiful. Sean and I thought about it and like what we would do. I think what we would give the park, if we gave the park a rating from like on a scale of 1 to 10, we'd give it like a 7. And that's not to say that what's there isn't amazing, and like there's stuff there that are 10s. Like Nemesis is a 10, Smiler is a 10. There's just some great stuff there, great things going on. Obviously, the castle, the gardens, like there's just some spectacular things to appreciate at a park like this. But then it's just marred with things that are not great. Everything from like not being able to see anything on the monorail because of these ugly, under-maintained like stickers on the windows, to the cheap buildings, the arcades, the punching games, like buildings that don't feel like they're there to last. This, like, they seem to have, in my mind, what's glaring to me about this park is their reluctance to build anything that feels permanent. They have all of these buildings and stuff. Thorpe Park is also guilty of this. And in fact, perhaps even more so. Their eagerness to do temporary looking buildings and cheap bathrooms and food trucks and stuff instead of like, this is the park that built Nemesis. This is the park that blew up the side of a hill to build a roller coaster, but they won't even pour concrete foundations for a building anymore because that's just the Merlin era that we're in. This is the Merlin Alton Towers and not the Tussauds Alton Towers anymore, unfortunately. But I hope a lot of these problems can be fixed. The ugly looking entrance plaza with the rainbow buildings, like all this park really needs is like some nice permanent looking buildings, some paint, some upkeep. It's been 10 years since my last visit, and I went right before shit hit the fan, obviously, with 2016 being the year that like there were a lot of negative changes within the park and the Merlin landscape as a whole. But from what I can tell, things are getting better. Additions like Toxicator are a great choice. Getting rides like Nemesis Subterra back in action, retheming Duel into the Curse at Alton Manor, giving the ride like a much needed makeover with like really nice effects. Like I hope that after the issues with Smiler's incident and after issues with COVID, like I hope that these parks are finally really moving in a direction where areas are going to feel fleshed out. Dark Forest and X Sector are going to have more to do than just 2 coasters. Vacancies, plots where they're missing rides are going to be filled. Areas like the David Williams area are getting like the redevelopment that they need.
I think it just again comes down to like the potential of this park is immense. It could be the Efteling of the UK. It doesn't have to, of course, be like the fairy tale themes, but it could just be a lot more cohesive. It could pay a lot more attention and maybe even homage to like the towers that it's literally named after. It could be this beautiful old abandoned estate that now has these really nice complementary areas that, you know, almost kind of like give like a historical edge to it. Like it could be a much more of a cohesive experience. It doesn't have to be colorful and wild because it just feels like it just feels cheap and slapped on. So I think there's potential. Like half the work is repainting and building some permanent buildings that complements the estate rather than throwing some shacks on there that don't complement anything at all. Get rid of the color purple. I don't know what their obsession is with purple and pink, but the purple and pink benches and like the purple buildings on this estate that has a classic, beautiful old ruined
400-year-old castle, and it's like
there is no need to be doing all that. Like I don't think anyone's asking for it. It's not selling anything. Like Alton Towers being this purple little dreamland is not realistic, especially when half your rides are themed to like supernatural events that have dark colored track. So there's really like room for improvement, but I was kind of expecting it to be all like Nemesis, be all like legendary secret weapon stuff, and how a lot of the actual infrastructure, a lot of the park, it's not like that at all. But if you take that away, it's a great park. It's an awesome experience, and coasters carry this place. Because like if you're a coaster enthusiast, a theme park enthusiast, these coasters are just, they are like almost like every enthusiast has to do it once in their life. You know, like they are legendary. And
Smiler and Nemesis alone are 2 of the best coasters.
And riding Oblivion is like coaster history. So you know, Air's riding coaster history. Of course, there was Nemesis and Smiler. So going there is still like the pilgrimage. I think one of the pilgrimages that every enthusiast has to make at one point. But from like a pure theme park aesthetic, of course, you travel all over the world. The theme park itself is quite disappointing. It's not all that. It's a lot of wasted space and honestly a lot of ruined space to me. Where like this is like a beautiful lawn, now there's an ugly fence, like an ugly, unpainted, terrible fence. Like little things like that are just really like detracting.
It's frustrating because of how relatively easy and relatively cheap it is to fix things that are wrong in this park. Like on the one hand, it's great because the roadmap to fixing Alton Towers is not long and it's not arduous, but it's also frustrating because the answers are right there. It can be done. The money is there. It's just not being managed in a way that elevates this park into an experience. It's not a park that I'd crave being in it and walking around. It's a park where if you're not riding something or like wandering around in the gardens, like you're probably frustrated at something. You're eating bad food. You're looking at something ugly. You're dealing with, infrastructural shortcomings. You're in a filthy, flimsy bathroom. Like it's all of these things. It's like it can all be fixed. It's all there. The potential is there. And I hope, like, I probably won't wait another 10 years between my Alton Towers visit. We'll probably go.
Yeah, we'll probably go more regularly, probably.
And I just hope that by the time we return, the upward trend of things like Toxicator and Curse at Alton Manor are the rule and not the exception, and that things like the monorail stations, the monorails themselves, the corkscrew at the entrance plaza, I just hope some of this stuff is fixed and looks nice and is pretty.
Yeah, there's potential, and we do like Alton Towers, but there's just some room for improvement. Yeah. And being a first-time visitor and having been think about this park for such a long time, and I've always wanted to go, and it's kind of didn't work out. And it's not like it's that convenient to London or anything. Like you have to really kind of like be on a vacation there. I just didn't love it as much as I thought it would. And other parks on this trip, which we'll of course talk about in the next couple episodes, definitely surprised me more in like a more positive way. Alton Towers was kind of like a slap in the face. I was like, this is the Alton Towers I've been dreaming of.
This is it.
This is Alton Towers. I mean, of course, not Coasters counting, but like generally speaking, a park. But with that, we are already recording one of our longest episodes.
An hour 45, but it's Alton Towers.
Sorry, guys, but it's Alton Towers.
Alton Towers.
So that's why it's got its own.
We hope
episode.
you, the listener, can appreciate why the Alton Towers episode was an hour 45.
And I hope you appreciated the episode. and if you did appreciate the episode or the season or the podcast in general, leave us a review wherever you're listening. If you're a Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or even Pocket Casts, please do really leave a 5-star review. Give us a couple of kind words. It helps us grow the podcast. And we appreciate you listening. Follow us on Instagram, Facebook. Those are our big 2 social medias these days. Posting lots and lots of content about the parks we're going to. Lots of cool photography that we've been doing. In fact, I edited Alton Tower photos today. We took like thousands of photos of Alton Tower. So all that's coming your way. We appreciate everything you do listening. And we'll catch you next week. Bye.
Bye.